Good evening and welcome back. I hope this episode finds you and your bowels, well, steady. If not, sit tight. No, sit still. In fact, just don't sit. Hear me out. Because if this administration hasn't hit you yet, I think we're getting closer. Now, do you remember the tariffs? What about the $1,000 per household? The stagflation, the grocery prices. How about the manufacturing jobs we were promised and the ones that actually arrived? And what about the one big, beautiful bill that has taken trillions from the people that needed it most? I remember these sweet nothings too, just a little different. Let's talk about it. This is Fit for Brains. The working poor voted for change, and change is exactly what they got. However, the change did not appear the way they anticipated, the way they were told it was going to be. In fact, they got concepts of change. That's why we here at Shit for Brains are going to look at the receipts. Let's review. Picture it. The year was 1992. Democratic presidential candidate William Jefferson Clinton, Bill, if you're nasty, was in a tight race with the Republican candidate and presidential incumbent George Bush, the big one, not the little one. So Clinton's team believed that voters voted with their pocketbook. Now that's a purse and or handbag for you younger millennials and Gen Zers who may think I'm speaking old English. Anyway, Clinton and his team centered the premise of their campaign messaging on that discipline as a primary focus. Now, why does this sound so horribly familiar yet different? Now, let's fast forward to 2024. The campaign trail is on the move and in full swing. Donald Trump, the Republican presidential candidate, said he would center his economic policy on the following: one, reducing inflation. Two, boosting domestic manufacturing through tariffs. Three, cutting taxes. And four, achieving energy dominance. In September 2024, he also said this. And remember those tariffs we talked about in episode one? Or better yet, the executive orders that went into rotation day one on January 20th, 2025. Hmm? Well, back in October 2024, Trump said this on the campaign trail, and I quote, "We will use the hundreds and billions, it's really trillions, okay? But we're going to use the hundreds of billions of tariff dollars to benefit American citizens and to pay off debt because we have to start paying off debt." Oh, yeah? Well, let's see how that's going. So, in a breakdown of who has been footing the bill, according to the Yale Budget Lab, tariffs are technically paid by importers, business owners, yes. But businesses usually pass at least part of the increase to consumers. So, in essence, low earners feel the impact more than wealthier households. How does that feel? Well, lower income families spend a higher percentage of income on goods that carries the most tariff exposure. So that includes such luxuries as food, clothing, and medicine, which brings the average tax increase in 2026 to $900 per US household, a tax nobody voted for. Ouch. We talked about such necessities like food and clothing while on the subject of tariffs. But what about medications? Well, if you recall, on the campaign trail, we were promised lower costs, but we weren't provided what that meant. Well, on July 31st, 2026, we found out when tariffs of up to 100% on brand name prescription medications went into effect. So that means no exemption for people who need to stay alive and no sliding scale for income. So if we're doing the math, and I'm no mathematician, but the medicine got a price tag while the condition didn't get a choice. Now let's take a trip back on the campaign trail in November 2024. Remember this? Picture it. July 4th, 2025. Trump signs the One Big Beautiful Bill into law. And 3.5 million people lost SNAP benefits when stricter eligibility rules took effect. Rules, you say? Well, the bill raised the work requirement age ceiling to 64 and now includes veterans, unhoused people, and former foster youth to the workforce population. Glad to have you back. And there is also a required 80-hour a month of work, volunteering, or training to keep benefits. Now, the reception to these changes are mixed, but in Arizona, participation in SNAP fell by 51%. So I guess you can say the working poor now with more paperwork. Federal minimum wage has been $7.25 an hour since July 24th, 2009, which is the longest stretch without an increase in the 88-year history of the Fair Labor Standards Act. I guess this is what inspired Trump to say this on the campaign trail in September 2024. I'll wait so you can read it. While you're there, just take a look at how far back the time period stretches when there were more manufacturing jobs. So the again and make America great again must be referencing the greatness of the 80s when it comes to jobs and wages, I guess. When the federal minimum wage peaked at $3.35 per hour in 1981. So be grateful because a full time worker earning the current minimum wage makes $15,080 a year, which is $20 above the 2026 federal poverty line for a single person. Add a dependent, and you're under that line. I feel like the walls are closing in. In fact, maybe it's the ceiling closing in on the floor. In 1992, James Carville hung a sign in Clinton campaign headquarters. Three lines. One of them a reminder that voters decide with their wallets. It worked. It became doctrine. 34 years later, the wallet's still the whole story. It's just not asking to be persuaded anymore. $900 a year in tariffs nobody voted on, along with a tax on staying alive. 3.5 million people off SNAP by paperwork, not by choice. And a minimum wage that hasn't moved since the flip phone was a status symbol. None of this is a metaphor, and it's not a messaging problem. It's the receipts. So I guess the change we got is the kind that jingles and not the kind that folds. So there you have it. Economic populism as performance. And the reviews are in. And well, you be the judge. Who has been the biggest benefactor and who has been the biggest donor? I'll wait. Anyway, I'm your anchor, continuing to hold you down as the storm continues. Stay hydrated and brace yourselves. We'll be back.
Trump turd, jummy brains, and ain't shit we can do about it. Shit for brains, so take a seat so we can talk about it. Talk about it, talk about it, talk about it.